of fighters who rose to defend social justice in these countries. Even within a country, the definitions or measures to be adopted for social justice have varied depending upon the times of the day. Mr. V.P. Singh, the former Prime Minister of India, was invited to give his address by the Harvard University. According to press reports, he had said, "I have the satisfaction that I acted as a catalyst by being the umpire to bring the vast majority of my nation who were spectators to the stadium of governance as players. In that attempt, the umpire's legs got broken. So what? A major step towards social justice took an irreversible direction." V.P. Singh's speech at Harvard University is a reflection of the realities of his time and what he found best to get over the wrong and the evil impact of gross inequalities in order to protect democracy and social justice. Dr. Ambedkar, the political and social philosopher, had looked upon the need for social justice in very concrete terms. In his words, a just society is that society in which ascending sense of reverence and descending sense of contempt is dissolved into the creation of a compassionate society. Justice is a very complex concept as it has a number of sources and dimensions. It has been examined by different people from different viewpoints within the limits of the time, space, and circumstances they lived in. Social justice is one of the dimensions of the concept of justice that stands for organization of society based on the principles of equality, liberty, and fraternity. Its greater emphasis is on the principle of equality, both social and economic, and fraternity with a view to create such human social conditions that ensure free and fair development of all human beings. As such, the concept of social justice sometimes require unequal or preferential treatment for certain sections of the population, which have been deprived of certain values for ages with a view to bring them on an equal footing with other sections of the population. Ambedkar, in his speech before the Constituent Assembly for the passage of the Constitution, said, in his concluding remarks, he said, "I have completed my work. I wish there should be a sunrise even tomorrow. The new Bharat has got political freedom, but it is yet to raise the sun of social and economic liberty." So ultimate social justice is about equality by birth. This has been stated so aptly by Lincoln in his Gettysburg Address to his soldiers when he said, "407 years ago, our forefathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. We are now engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure." If Lincoln said it in 1863, much ahead of his time, much ahead of who are conceived to be the philosophers of the world, for the simple reason that they were alone known to the Western world, there was a philosopher in the Tamil-speaking land called Thiruvalluvar, who put it in so simple terms, "Pirapukkum ella uyirkkum." All are equal by birth. So social justice is basically the recognition that all men are created equal. Wherever there is violation of this right, the fight for social justice begins and continues through legislative, social, and other measures. Let's confine our discussion to Indian and Tamil Nadu context. In Tamil Nadu and or in the former Madras province, the resistance to an allegoric system prevalent within the legal framework under the British rule brought out the emergence of the Justice Party and thereafter Dravidar Kazhagam. Politically, the torchbearers of the Dravidar Kazhagam can be considered to be the DMK and the ADMK. The conditions prevalent in the then Madras province made it possible for the largest section of people who were defined as Sudras to rise in revolt. The credit goes to the Justice Party and the Dravidar Kazhagam, who were instrumental to organize these people to fight for their rights. The basic contention of Periyar was that everybody's self-respect should be accepted and recognized, and people should be ready to fight for preserving their self-respect. It's on this basis of this basic cardinal principle that all the other components of his fight enlarge themselves. His fight for entry into temples of scheduled castes, his fight for reservations in educational and government institutions, his fight for gender equality, and his unrelenting fight against irrational religious faiths, all these are brought under a single umbrella of preservation of human dignity, ensuring that every human being's self-respect is to be protected. The fight for the preservation of the right to self-respect of every individual necessarily extends into areas of social, economic, political arena. When it comes to social arena, religion cannot be excluded. The religion that was and is existing in a major way, covering a major population of this country, what is known and called as Hinduism, discriminates people by birth. And hence, if social justice is to be ensured, and if such a discrimination is to be eradicated, a fight against such notions of discrimination becomes inevitable. It is taken as a fight against religion. The right way of calling it is a fight against irrationality. If a religion happens to be irrational, such a religion should not be allowed to play upon human lives. This is inevitable in a fight towards social justice, and this is what Dr. Ambedkar in the Indian context and Periyar in the Madras province context insisted upon and fought for. While the fire was lit very bright and the torch was carried over in the political empowerment system, namely capturing the legislative assembly in Tamil Nadu by followers of Periyar, it took quite some time for many parts of the rest of the country, and it is taking quite some time in some other parts of the country even to catch on. You need a big catalyst to ensure that a chemical reaction takes place faster. Dr. Ambedkar and EVR were such a catalyst during the fight for freedom of India. And after the fight for political freedom of India was won, such a great catalyst was Mr. V.P. Singh. We have laws. We have progressive laws. May not be progressive enough to ensure social justice immediately and instantly, but laws that leads us towards social justice. Congress party, which was more a political system than a political party, in that it had extreme rightists and extreme leftists within its fold, was progressive in policy formulation, but rather conservative in program implementation, especially when it came to ensuring social justice. Again, that was not the case within Congress in all parts of India. If we take Tamil Nadu, we had progressives like Omandu Ramswamy Reddyar, followed by Kamaraj, and in Kerala, apart from the progressive communists, we had progressive leaders like A.K. Antony from within Congress. Such leadership, such a catalyst ensured that the journey towards social justice is quicker and sharply oriented. If we take the case of Tamil Nadu alone, Tamil Nadu has been fortunate for the past 70 years that it had regimes who did not drift away from the concept of social justice. Some regimes believed in and constantly and tirelessly worked towards achieving social justice. Some other regimes knew that without declaration of adherence to this concept, they winning the election is not possible. In the Indian context, in an aim to achieve social justice within a democratic system, what is the consensus? What is the controversy? The consensus is a legal framework that was accepted and adopted in the Constitution of India. The Constitution of India was an attempt by one brave man to bring in the concept of social justice and to insist upon it while understanding the difficulties of the world he was living in, where he cannot totally force it. That's why we have fundamental rights and directive principles in the Indian Constitution. That this much was done to keep or protect the interest of who are known as backward classes, the credit mainly, one can even say solely, goes to Dr. Ambedkar. Today, we are in the position to raise our voices of protest against attempts to take the country to retrograde system only because we have a constitution on the basis of which we are able to speak. The consensus was obtained by Dr. Ambedkar thanks to the left of center thinkers like Jawaharlal Nehru being present in the Constituent Assembly. Thereafter, what were the controversies that erupted? When an attempt was made to provide reservation for SCs and STs, the powers that be, the established orders that be, did not feel it a threat to themselves, and therefore it was rather without much difficulty enacted because of two reasons. Number one, the powers that be did not feel it a threat. And number two, the effective way in which the conscience of the nation was pricked by pointing out that all evils that happened to one section of Indian society who largely contributed to increasing its wealth, nobody could have the courage to talk openly against such benefits in terms of reservation in education and government jobs being provided and the number of other measures that were being given to SCs and STs. Now, when reservation for OBCs, which was totally in consonance with the provisions of the Constitution, were proposed, we all know how stay order was issued by Supreme Court. We all know how ultimately the provision for reservation was given with a lots of ifs and buts. We also know how reservation for economically weaker sections were proposed, how the court acted. So while the consensus has been that the weaker section should certainly be provided in terms of positive discrimination to make up for the historical wrongs perpetrated upon them for centuries, because this consensus is more of a holy cow statement, controversies arise whenever such a policy statement is to be implemented. Herein comes controversies prevalent within various states of India. A question very often raised is why Tamil Nadu raises its voice about many things which the union government proposes, irrespective of which is the ruling party in the union government. It's just because Tamil Nadu has been progressive in thinking, in finding out the root cause of the problem of denial of social justice, thanks to one single person, a man who was not seen as a great theoretician, but who knew how to struggle ruthlessly, even rudely, namely Periyar. It's because of this one person that people understood what they are missing and how to get it and how to control the legislature through people's will. Because of this reason, Tamil Nadu is progressive, not only in its social thinking, from out of social thinking came the political and economic resurgence. Nothing is going to stop the fight for social justice. In a democratic system, the fight is through the legal process, namely through legislature and through judiciary. If the legislature and judiciary at the highest level have contradictory views in comparison to the views held by one particular state, that one particular state will continue to struggle. This is what Tamil Nadu has been doing, whether it is NEET or NEP or a host of other issues. I do have great admiration for Tamil Nadu and Kerala due to their relative progress in enforcement of social justice. Tamil Nadu and Kerala can certainly take a lot of pride in terms of many indicators of social justice, infant mortality rate, or density of school and college education, or the evolution of backward classes in terms of economic, social, and political rights. But I may also add a note of caution. The social justice has not been obtained fully in either of the two states. Time and again, ugly incidents arise. Upper caste women refusing to be rescued in flood situation in Kerala by fishermen on the grounds that they should not be touched by low caste men. And in Tamil Nadu, the horrible incident of adding human waste in the water tank used by SCs. Also, we can take a pride, self-satisfaction about the great strides we have made in the march towards social justice when we compare ourselves to democracies prevalent in some of the other parts of the world, say Western Europe. My question is, also can we take such a pride when we compare ourselves to some of the practices in Western countries? In those countries, a human chain, a silent march by the people, is considered a big step that calls for correcting the course of action that the government of the day is going about. There are two reasons for it. The people in general are aware of their rights, and the government is sensitive to the people's rights. A progressive state like Tamil Nadu should now be prepared to not look upon the other states of India to compare, but to look upon more progressive states in Asia like Vietnam about inclusive growth, or some Western countries on how people's voice is heard. This calls for creating an awareness in the people about what is the Constitution of India. Many a time I have had the privilege of participating in debates in the media where I have repeatedly said that as much as a subject is taught and time is dedicated to history, science or maths from class 6 to 10, a whole paper should be prescribed for the study of the Indian Constitution. When the children know what are their rights as future citizens and future voters, they are going to tell the present voters, their parents, that they should not think one-time gift of cash, liquor and chicken the only benefits that they are entitled to, and that they are entitled to much greater benefits. They are the ones electing the legislatures. They are the masters. If Tamil Nadu can succeed in taking the people towards this, Tamil Nadu can once again prove that it is a state that never lets down its people when it comes to the question of protecting and ensuring social justice. So the final question. In the Indian democracy, what is the status quo of social justice in terms of consensus and controversies? Because of a few staunch champions of social justice like Ambedkar and Periyar, social justice hitherto has been a fire that could not be put out. Because of the strength of the established social order, continuous attempts are being made to extinguish that fire. For the fire to grow stronger, people as a whole should be taught and be made aware of their rights. Till then, the enlightened few of us who are aware of the realities should continue to bear the torch. So, in slight modification of Robert Frost, the woods are lovely, dark and deep, but we have promises to keep, and miles to go before we sleep, and miles to go before we sleep. Thank you.
Okay. The Vice Chancellor of the University, Professor Dr. S. Gauri, University of Madras, and all over who have come here to attend this two-day seminar. Let me first welcome all of you and thank the organizers for inviting me to this very important seminar. Just as a matter of importance in a university context, I must first validate or clarify some facts among the earlier speakers. In fact, last year we reduced the revenue deficit by 16,000 crores, not 7,000 crores, so it was a much bigger number. This year, I think we'll do even better than that. So we are on track under the leadership of our Chief Minister to make significant progress in very short time. I also want to talk a little bit about this notion of rescuing universities. I have studied organizational theory, human psychology in multiple places. And I believe that alignment of incentives and the design of organizations, structures, accountability, evaluation, performance incentivization, these are all very important. Without these, we cannot get good outcomes. In that sense, one of my big concerns has been whether it is public sector enterprises under the BPE or universities that are autonomous by design because we want to keep academics independent of interference from the administration. We often find that autonomy works as a one-way street. So all decision making, hiring, paying, investment, etc. is done autonomously. And when financial troubles hit, all of a sudden the government is the bailout for all these entities. So I have been very clear. I am all for autonomy as long as it is a two-way street. If you run independently, whether that is public sector enterprises in power or milk or any other place, in a way that you take care of your own finances, we don't want to interfere in your functioning. It is only appropriate that academia, that enterprises should be a part of politics, and governments have a tendency to swing towards politics. But if you require funding from the government, then the government is going to ask you some questions that might be uncomfortable about ratios of expenditure towards what they're intended and so forth. I don't want to get too far into the detail, but I would say that, as the Vice Chancellor here knows, we've already made significant progress last year in some one-time settlements. We are happy to do what we have to do, as long as responsibility flows in both directions. And so we'll do the right thing. The other thing, a minor thing I want to say is that, like the professor, I too had a PR in Singapore. I also had a green card in the US. I gave up both of those to come back. So I'm definitely a returnee at some level. Now I want to make a very, very important distinction or a clarification from Mr. Balachandran's statement. The notion of social justice far predates Periyar's involvement, starting with the self-respect movement and into the DK. When the Justice Party government was formed in 1921, Periyar was a member of the Congress. When the legislation for women to have the right to vote was introduced and passed, when compulsory elementary education for boys and girls was introduced and passed, when the communal GO was introduced and passed for caste reservation, all those were done by the Justice Party prior to Periyar leaving the Congress. So we must not not forget that there were crusaders that were long before the self-respect movement working on social justice. Anyway, with those corrections, let me talk a little bit on the subject at hand. Democracy and social justice. Two distinct but correlated in multiple ways notions. The notion of democracy, in my mind, is at its core one person, one vote, equality. That is, that every person has equal say in determining the direction of the collective of all people that is formed into a republic, a country. In that sense, democracy actually has some strengths and some weaknesses. Its key strength by design is to allow and yet mitigate a capitalist economy or a free market. It allows it by having rules and regulations and ensuring that markets can function without excessive interference or cartelization or capture. But it should work in such a way that it doesn't allow the benefits to go to so few that the Karl Marx view of the world, where the returns to capital become higher and higher and higher, and the returns to labor become lower and lower and lower, to the point where the social structure is broken and you have blood on the streets revolution, because the workers at the bottom of the pyramid revolt against getting less and less of the share. If democracy is then both the enabler and the antidote to free markets and capitalism, then scale is one. Normally, we don't have such power problems in Tamil Nadu. I would have normally not been a conspiracy theorist. I would have said power comes and goes now and then. But given what's happening about power being cut in JNU and all that, I was starting to wonder whether the power was cut based on the title of the conference. But anyway. So I think the problem of executing the vision of democracy in any country through the constitution, most constitutions are fantastically well designed. But when it comes to execution, scale gets in the way. If you think about it, one man, one vote works, or one person, one vote works very well when we go down to the council elections and we have about 1,000 or 2,000 voters per every councillor. Truly, the accountability of the elected to the electorate is real, is tangible. You get to something like an MLA, and now you have about 2.5 lakh voters for every representative. The direct connect is not that strong. The ability for any one individual to hold an elected representative accountable is not that high. And in fact, the ability to influence the outcome through mass media and other communication becomes more important or becomes higher. So you start to see the breakdown of this notion of the relationship and accountability between the elected and the electorate. And then of course you go to something like a Lok Sabha seat or large scale democracy where you have in Tamil Nadu about 1.5 million people, 15 lakh people elect an MP. And now that link is completely broken, and the party system and propaganda and larger picture values and the notion of projecting some particular leader as if that leader is God and can change outcomes, all of this starts getting in the way of true democracy. But in design, democracy is intended, let us be very clear, to increase equality, to ensure accountability, and to give every person equal treatment in many aspects, in every aspect. What about social justice? What actually defines a society, and what do we consider justice? As many people pointed out, particularly Mr. Balchandran pointed out, at different times the dividing line of who is above and who is below the line of equality has changed. If you look at societies like the United States, at one time it was about religion, or Western Europe, who was a Catholic versus who was a Protestant, there was discrimination. If you look at different points, it was about race, who was of African origin or who was of Caucasian origin. At other points in other societies, it was about class, who was of the working class and who was of the landed or the noble class, as they called it then. In our case, in Tamil Nadu, it has been long about caste or community, who are forward caste, who are backward, who are oppressed, who are scheduled, and so forth. But social justice has been at the core of politics at least for 100 years, more than 100 years, in the land where we stand today. So going back to the formation of the South Indian Liberal Federation in 1916, at which my great-granduncle was one of the signatories and funders of the movement, and shareholders by buying shares in the society. It is beyond debate that I would say, though different parties have managed the government, have been elected to run the government of Madras Presidency, then Madras State, then divided Madras State after Andhra was taken out, separated, and then the state of Tamil Nadu. Throughout this 100 years or 100 plus years, since the 1921 first Justice Party government after the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms, social justice has been either at the core of or somewhat respected by the governments that have run, that have administered this region, the place where we stand today. So much so that even the Congress Party or the Swatantra or coalition governments that came to ruling power, administrative power between 1937 and 1967, adhered much more closely to the Dravidian philosophy, to the social justice philosophy, than they did to the Congress's philosophy across the rest of India. For example, temple nationalization of the kings and historic temples was done by the Justice Party in Thiru Rajaji's time, and then in Thiru Bhaktavachalam's time, that was doubled up, that the Dalit Temple Entry Act was signed, that Archana is being said in Tamil was promoted and legalized and so forth. The Justice Party legislated compulsory elementary education for boys and girls in 1921. The emphasis on education was only expanded further in the time of Thiru Kamaraj in terms of buildings of schools and expanding the noon meal program originated in Madras Corporation to the state of Tamil Nadu, or the state of Madras as it was then known. So in almost every way, if you look, the Congress Party of this part of the world adhered to the values because they were such profoundly successful and impactful values in the notion of social justice. I want to talk a little bit about the controversies or the complexities rather than the controversies in the notion of social justice. But before I do that, I just want to mark this point in time. There are many models of development. There are even potentially many models of democracy. There are organizations that rate democracies as a fully functional democracy, as a semi-functional democracy, as a kind of autocracy, or then worse than that. But as far as India is concerned, the constitution is the same. We all operate under the same constitution. And the union government is enormously powerful under the design of that constitution. Maybe rightly so. Maybe it's past its validity in terms of the concentration of power. Maybe we need a lot of amendments to empower states and regions more. But at the inception, though the constitution says that India is a union of states, in fact the power resides largely with the union and has increased towards the union. Another discussion for another day. But within such a structure where the union is almost all powerful, let us look at the contrast between three states. A poor state relatively like Bihar, and two relatively rich states like Tamil Nadu and Gujarat. If you look at Bihar and Tamil Nadu, the distinction is very, very clear. The average age in Bihar is about 20 years old. In Tamil Nadu, it's about 34, 35. That's because the total fertility rate in Bihar is still north of 3. In Tamil Nadu, it's only 1.6. The average education in Bihar is elementary school dropout. In Tamil Nadu is high school graduate. The per capita income in Bihar is about 50 or 60,000 rupees below the national average of 134. In Tamil Nadu, it's more than double at 280 or 290. So we have had profoundly different outcomes between rich and poor states. The gross enrollment ratio into tertiary education is 53%, in Tamil Nadu is probably 12 or 14% in Bihar. But what about comparing rich states? Does it mean that all rich states develop the same way? Has there been equal social justice or other forms of justice or equity in rich states? If you compare Gujarat and Tamil Nadu, we are both roughly 11% of the nation's manufacturing. Tamil Nadu is slightly higher percentage of the total GDP, but because the population is higher here, the per capita GDP, Gujarat is slightly higher than us. We're both double the national average. But economically, we're kind of roughly in the same place at the aggregate. But if you delve into the details, we are vastly different states. The poverty rate in Tamil Nadu is under 4%. In Gujarat, it's almost 4 times that. The percentage of 18-year-old girls that have completed high school or are completing high school in Tamil Nadu is about 85%. In Gujarat, it's about 50%. The number of doctors per 1,000 people in Tamil Nadu is 4. In Gujarat, it's 1. The number of factories is much higher. The number of people engaged in those kinds of jobs is much higher as a percentage of the population. So what we have is 2 completely different societies in terms of social justice or economic outcomes at a per capita level. At aggregate level, they look the same. That's what 100 years of social justice or not having 100 years of social justice yields in the outcome. So that's something we must remember. Now, let's look at some more complicated issues. This notion of reservations, which, as I said, was first introduced back in the early 1920s by the Justice Party, seminal legislation. And what it said is that jobs will be reserved for candidates coming from certain communities based on the population proportion. So if you're 3% of the population, you get 3% of jobs, not 65% of the jobs, as the data showed at that time. Now, at the time, and even today, if you go to places like the US, they say affirmative action is okay, but quotas are not okay. We basically legislated quotas. That's what reservation is. What is the argument against reservation or against quotas? It is that in the short term, it is inefficient. Completely agree. For example, if you only introduce compulsory elementary education to all communities in 1920 or 21, surely if you start reserving 35% of the jobs for this community or 20% of the jobs for that community, there are not enough people of that community who have qualified to do that job because they have not had the opportunity to get education. But the whole point is that in the long term, what it does is that it builds an inclusive society, because the greatest facilitator or enabler of people being able to reach certain positions, whether it's a job in the government or a private enterprise or a university, is having a forerunner, is having a munnudarnam, having somebody who has been there, done that, from your community, from your village, from your town, who can tell you how it is done, how the ropes are laid, what the system is, and how you should apply and where you should go. If you look around the world, this is true even today. Ivy League schools will always take their students from certain high school universities because there's a pipeline. They say, oh, I know this fellow knows that fellow. I'll tell my junior, he'll tell his junior, she'll tell her junior, so on. So this ability to create coattails, to create a pipeline, to create a guide is in the long term so valuable that we don't mind having inefficiencies. Societally, of course, there will be individuals who will say, I'm super qualified, but because you constrained the quota for my community, I did not get this job. This individual is not so qualified, but because you gave some quota for that community and there are not enough qualified people in that community, therefore that person is going to get a job. Individually, I am more qualified than that person. True. But if we don't make the change today, for 50 years there will be a continuance of those who are qualified and have a guide and have a pathway and have an example to guide them. And those who don't have something like that will never be able to break through. So even though there are arguments to be made that reservations and hard quotas are inefficient in the short term, that is the price we are willing to pay, policy-wise, government-wise, administration-wise, for the long-term benefits of making a system truly inclusive. So in my mind, that's not really a controversy anymore. Another area where we get a lot of kind of pushback or a lot of sloganeering is that somehow measurement is a bad thing. measurement is against social justice. No, you cannot put a meter on my power. No, you cannot put a meter on my water because it is the slippery slope that is going to lead to charging tomorrow, or it is going to create some negative impact in the future. Actually, we need to step back a little bit, right? If we want to look at justice, the classic symbol of justice is the Lady of Justice who's blindfolded and holds the scales in her hand. The notion being that in the eyes of the law, everybody should be equal. That's the equivalent to being blindfolded. I can't see who is approaching me with a case. I should treat them equally, irrespective of who the individual is. In fact, I would argue the other way, that as far as the law is concerned and the judicial system is concerned, any country where people can play their privilege rather than get level treatment is not really a democracy, is not really a country under the rule of law. But the problem is, if we continue that kind of model into social and economic justice, now we start running into trouble. So if you look at the symbol of the Justice Party, it was not the lady holding the scales, it was just the scales. Because if you want the scales to balance, you can be blind if you assume that two people approaching the system for judgment have equal opportunity, equal access, equal standing. You don't want one to be powerful and one to be weak. If they are equal standing, then they get equal outcomes. But we know that's not true in our society. In our society, we have had oppression of certain communities and castes for hundreds or thousands of years. Some people have been at the top, some people have been in the middle, some people have been at the bottom. So the only way we can provide a justice in terms of outcomes is to give, as Thiru Balakrishnan pointed out, reservations and unequal treatment to those who have been historically oppressed to bring the scales back into balance. If we are going to do that, of course, we need to know who they are. We need to be able to identify. That's why in the admission system, whether it is in colleges or in universities or in government jobs, we ask for a community certificate. Because you need to know who it is to decide how you bring the system back into balance, how the scales can be brought back into balance. I will now extend that to economic justice. This notion that somehow measurement of utilization or measurement of consumption is against the notion of social justice, in my mind, is a propaganda against actual justice in outcomes. Why should it be that somebody who uses 10,000 units of power should get the same subsidy as somebody who uses 200 units of power? It doesn't make sense. That's why we have meters to measure electricity. Why shouldn't that principle also apply to water or other things? Why shouldn't it also apply to property taxes? So actually knowing who uses what, knowing who gets what, is at the core of providing economic justice. That is why progressive taxation like income taxes, where we set the slab based on what we know to be your income, are much more equitable and fair than regressive taxes like petrol or diesel taxes or GST, where it's a point of sale tax that gets passed on to the consumer, but we have no way of knowing who is consuming how much. We know there must be regressive by design because poorer and middle class people spend much more of their income or wealth on taxable goods and services than rich people. Rich people, if I'm 100 times richer than a poor person, I cannot eat 100 times more. So then I have money left over to do things like investments in real estate and art and the stock market and other things. So if you look at the proportion of total income spent on taxable goods and services, poor people, middle class people spend much more of it. And if the rate of taxation in GST is flat, or petrol is flat at 18 or 15 or 12 or 20, then poorer people end up paying a much higher effective tax rate. This is an argument I've been making for a long time, and I hope many of you have seen the Oxfam report that came out last week, where they have quantified it and said that the bottom of the pyramid pays 65% of all GST, and that the top 10% pay a very, very small portion, right? That's what you would expect theoretically in economics, and now the data validates that. So if you have blind taxes like GST, where we don't know who we are taking it from, you are going to get unfair outcomes. and you have line of sight taxes like income taxes, then you can raise the rates progressively and say if you're below this much, no tax. If you're above that much, 40% tax or 60% tax, and therefore make it equitable. So though these are sometimes seen as controversial issues, and very often they are used as propaganda by those benefiting from unfair outcomes, in fact, we have to keep a clear distinction that justice before the law requires the lady to be blindfolded, the lady of justice to be blindfolded. But justice in other measures, whether it's social justice or economic justice, requires increasingly greater clarity of the person standing before the scale asking for justice. Only then we can actually ensure justice in the outcome. Having said that, let me mention that I think this is such an important seminar. In the world we live in today, where propaganda seems to fill the waves and not enough light or debate happens, it is hugely encouraging that the University of Madras, following in the great tradition of a century-old university and in the land of social justice in this Tamil Man, is the right host and the right location for such a seminar. I wish you a couple of days of both enlightening and enjoyable discussions. I urge all the young people here to absorb this debate, to question it vigorously. But then if you are convinced about the values, about what is right, about what is fair, that you must become ambassadors of social justice. And I would say that much has been done in the last 100 years. Much still remains to be done. And the hope of any society rests on the young, the future leaders of this country. And I have no doubt that as everything is temporary, so also the situation of relatively mindless propaganda driving politics is a passing phase. Because I have great faith in the youth, great faith in education, great faith in your ability to remove the noise and see the light. And so I wish you all the very best. I thank you for coming, and I'll take my leave.
Thank you, sir, for delivering such an impactful speech. Your words have provided valuable insights and perspectives